As we go into autumn and winter, how do you decide where to fish on your canalised lake? The first thing is, in the summertime, the lake has got plenty of colour and the fish want to feed. So they're always going to be coming close to you. You can catch them really close in the edge because the water's really coloured, they're really confident, so they're going to come close to you. Also, they want to eat, so a lot of the time you can throw bait out of your hand, everything wants to compete for that bait, so they come close to you. As we go into autumn and winter, the first thing is the colour of the water starts to drop out, so the fish have got less confidence, so distance away from you is really, really important. But the first thing that I look at is, once I've drawn my peg, is what is the space around you. You've got to look as almost like you're the fish. So when it's really, really tightly pegged, I'm trying to look and think, where's the quiet little bits where I'd feel safe? I want to get away from me. So where are the little bits where I feel like, yeah, I'd love to go and sit there? And that's the biggest difference really between the sort of your summertime and your winter time. Summertime, they're hungry, they're active, they want to feed, they're going to come close to you. You can be quite aggressive with your bait and fishing in shallow water. But in the winter time, they want to like, no, I don't want to go anywhere near you. So trying to find the little quiet corners. So once you've drawn your peg, sort of, you know, you put your seat box down, what pegs are in around you? Sort of looking along the banking, that's how it's normally pegged, every other peg. So when you get like corners, that's sort of free space that other people haven't got. So it's a great place where the fish are naturally, once everyone's, you know, started shipping out, tapping a bit of bait in, catching a few fish, they're more and more likely to drift into those quiet corners. And then the latter part of the match, as the light starts to, you know, fade, it gets that little bit darker again, it's all to do with confidence for the fish, then they start coming closer to be able to feed later on. So sort of looking at me peg, I've got a lot more space to my left hand side. It's a lot wider than it is to my right hand side. So in my mind, again, if I was a fish, I'm more going to be wanting to look to the left hand side of my peg. Again, another little thing when it comes to the winter time is, again, with that space, if you see an odd fish topping, sometimes it can give you a great sort of advantage of where they're sat. I think sometimes they're there, one moves, maybe bumps into it, spooks one, and they do tend to top when they shoal up a little bit. So roughly looking at my peg, I feel like I've got more space to the left hand side, that's where I want to fish. Again, distance is so important. Summertime, be able to throw our bait short, get bites all of the time. They will come to us when it's warm. In the winter, unfortunately, we've got to do a little bit of hard work, or harder work, and we need to go towards them. I almost look at it, the closer you get into the space where there's no pressure, the bigger the volume of fish are going to be. So rather than thinking, well, I'll just fish sort of like 5-6 metres, you're better off fishing like 11, 13 or even 14 metres, depending on the makeup of the lake. The next bit is, what depths do you decide? I think in F1 fishing and carp fishing, but more so on canalised lakes, the depth has always been really, really important. And as a rule of thumb, depending on your venue, is 1, what you're fishing for, and 2, how deep it is. So what I mean by what you're fishing for, if you're going to, or your canalised lake that you're going to has got more carp in it, you always tend to catch carp in slightly shallower water than you will do with F1s. So that's one thing to bear in mind. And then another thing, as a rough guide, however deep it is down the middle, roughly half that, or just over half that is the depth that I'm going to be looking to fish across and in the edge. So here today it is in between 4 and 4.5 foot. So at sort of half depth would be 2 foot. For me, that's a little bit too shallow. Again, when the colour of the water starts to drop out, the fish, they're not going to want to come there because that's their ceiling. Like, we haven't really got a ceiling, it's the ozone layer. So their ceiling, when you're starting to go in too shallow water, they're coming, you know, as your canalised lake, you've got your shelves, you know, you've got your banking, you've got your shelves, and then they gradually go down and you've got it in the deep water. But as they start to, you know, creep up the shelf, there'll be a depth or a point where it's too shallow and they're turned back around. And that's what I mean by the depth that I'm looking to be able to fish across and in the edge, is knowing that once you've been to your venue a few times, you'll have an idea that that seems a really good depth for the fish to keep coming in. So in the summertime, they're competing, they're coming that real shallow water, but as the colour of the water starts to drop and it's getting really cold, they just won't want to go there, it's far too clear. So my little rule, because here is predominantly F1s and a few carp, roughly just over half depth, so it's just over 4 foot. So in my mind, 2.5 foot is absolutely perfect. I feel like, you know, in that depth, say that's the deepest part of the lake is where my float is. At that depth, the fish, they can come in, but they've got enough water above their heads to feel confident and safe to eat. Whereas when I start taking the depth away, there come a point where it's like, no, I don't like it. And that's why I feel like having your depth markers is really important, because once you've been, if you're getting a few liners and indications, you can go in shallow water, but if you go too far, nothing happens and it's too shallow. So bearing in that, you know, that in mind, depending on where you're going. So say down the middle, just over 4 foot. So for me, 2.5 foot is perfect. If it was 5 foot again, I'm going to say just under 2.5 foot. So again, it's just under half depth. But the breaking point, to be honest, I think is about 6 foot. So 6 foot, 3 foot's lovely across, just a lovely depth, half depth. But then if you went somewhere where it was like 7, 8 foot, I feel like 4 foot's a bit too deep, because it's, again, that volume of water above their head. So again, around 3.5 foot is perfect. But if you went to a venue, and this is why I want to touch on the depth, and it was 4 foot deep, or even 3.5 foot, then sort of even just over 2 foot would be a perfect depth. But think about, say, the depth down the middle and what depth you're looking to target across and in the edge. So that's the first bit regarding the depth. The next decision is, where do I actually fish? So what I'm after is, one, distance away from yourself, which I think is really important, but also where possible, more so for down the middle, because across it's always different slopes depending on how slope it is. But down the middle, what I'm looking for is just a nice little flat area. Don't want to be in the nooks and crevices. So what I want to quickly show you when it comes sort of fishing down the middle is trying to find, say, a nice bottom. So here it plumbs up and it's nice, but the thing you've got to be wary of is when the bottom is really, really soft. Now, as it starts getting really cold, it doesn't matter as much of how hard the bottom is. But when it's still quite warm, fishing on like a soft bottom is not good. So I start off with a heavy plummet, and what I want to show you is when I drop it and lift up, you can see that my plummet sticks. See there, it's stuck. So that's stuck in the silt, and where my float is there, can you see all the blows and bubbles coming up around it? When you get a volume of fish on a real soft bottom, they can be a bit of a nightmare to catch. One, they fizz up, and I don't think you can see, they can see the bait as well. But also you can foul hook them. But sometimes in fishing, we know what it's like, you've got what you've got. But if that is the case, I wanted to show you that, if that's what the bottom's like down the middle, and you're getting a few pimps, and you've caught a few, a good tip, if you go in and you know, maybe your float sat a little bit too low, or you're foul looking a nodding, just pop your plummet back on and make sure that when you plumb up, you're that body over depth. And I wanted to show you that nice and close, just so you're aware of it for, say, your track line. But today, say, as it's getting colder, biggest thing I want is, if I was the fish, where am I going to be sat? In that corner, out of the way. So I want to go to them to give them, say, that little bit more confidence to feed. So as I'm shipping out, I'm going to come around to my left hand side, and this is my little spot where I want to fish. So you can see that I'm a body over depth, but also when it comes to your track line, is think about the distance between, you know, where that near side slope is as it's going down from the shallow water, but likewise where I want to be fishing across, which is slightly over to my left again. I don't want to be too close to here. So if I decided to fish here, for argument's sake, where I'm going to be fishing across, this line, because I'm going to need to prime it, what I mean by that is sort of like loose feed a few live maggots just to get some fish there, maybe put a little bit of ground bait. If I start loose feeding maggots here, yes, it's definitely going to drag some fish in my peg, but it's probably going to be taking a few fish away from me across line. So by coming straight down sort of the middle of the canal, the middle of that deep water flat track bit, here is nice because it's separate from me other two lines that I want to fish. So I've got a nice little flat area there where I'm that body over depth, and that is my little spot that I'm looking for. And once I've found it, what you'll be able to see, got a bit of tape on my pole, that's where I'm going to hold my hand, and then the last bit is looking at my far bank marker. Now I'm not going to pick somebody's roller that could move, could blow over. I don't want to pick anything that's going to move, but in my eye line on the actual bank, I've got a few reeds and then I've got that tree, but behind that I've got a scaffold tube that's in where you'll be able to see the ropes going. Dead in line with that scaffold tube is exactly where I want to fish. So most important thing when it comes to picking your far bank marker is just make sure you don't pick anything that's going to get up and move during the match. So that's my track line. Again, it's a nice distance away from me where I can loose feed my bait reasonably accurately. If I need to tighten it up, we can always pot a few maggots. But most importantly, I'm going towards where the fish want to be. And I think that's really important as the colour of the water starts to drop out of the lake, to say the fish, they want to get away from you. So that's where we're going to be feeding our deep water line, or our track line as we call it. So I'm going to pop my plummet back off and show you about me next two lines. So today, again, because we've got so much room, I want to be making the most of that room. If the peg 2 down from me was in and I didn't have as much space, then it's going to be more fishing across and then say down the middle. But what I wouldn't want to do as well, distance is important, but if you've got two anglers really close to each other, you don't want to go towards each other, because then you're creating that pressure there and the fish are naturally going to back off. So when it comes to plumbing up, depending on who's around you, look at what they're doing. Are they coming, you know, a bit too close my way? I want my own water. I want my own little bit to be able to fish in. We're very fortunate today to say have that nice area of space down our left hand side. So I don't just want to feed down the middle. I want to line across and in the edge. So set my flow at 2.5 foot, and then the next bit is trying to find a nice bottom to be able to fish on. So again, I'm going to pop my plummet back on, and this is the one thing that will change my mind slightly on the depth. So just under 4.5 foot, 2.5 foot's perfect. If it plumbed up nicer in 2 foot, I wouldn't fish there because it's too shallow. I want that 2.5 foot. But if it plumbs up nicer in 3 foot, then I'm definitely going to fish in 3 foot. And what I mean by nicer is I want to try and find somewhere that's just that little bit of a gradual slope. I don't want to be fishing on a cliff face. So if 2.5 foot, you know, it's on this slopey bit that's sort of going away all of the time, but in 3 foot it was more of a gradual incline, then I'd set my float at 3 foot and fish where the bottom's nice. So your depth is just a guide, but try and look at it as the point of where I don't want to be fishing rather than exactly where I want to fish. So I know that I don't want to be fishing in 2 foot, it's too deep, but like 2.5 to 3 foot, wherever it plumbs up nicest, that's where we're going to fish. So for shipping across, again, looking at my peg, I've got some reeds across. That's lovely, you know, that's going to be able to hold a few fish. But I never like fishing right next to the reeds because 1, your rig can get tangled on it, but 2, as they start to die, the bottom tends to be a little bit dirtier there, so I tend to avoid it. You know, it's a great place for maybe dobbing a bit of bread, but it's not a place where I want to be fishing on the bottom when I'm feeding bait. So I've already got my little bit of tape on. And biggest thing I would say, when you are fishing across on a slope, because that slope is going to be very similar as how it's coming off the island. But a lot of the time when you're on a canalised lake, especially in the winter time, is you're not always just going to be able to fish straight in front of you to be able to get bites. Again, you're going to need to be going towards the space. So what that means is you're going to be fishing on a slight angle to yourself. So at the moment it's probably, I'm going to say, about 11 o'clock. But if I wanted to go a little bit further, it's trying to picture in your mind that slope underwater. And what I want to do is try and show you what I mean by that. So if I go really close to the island, like so, you'll be able to see there, it's probably about 20 inch deep. Summertime, absolutely perfect. This time of the year though, and as it's getting colder, it's too shallow. So trying to find, say, the depth and just a nice little gradual slope. So as I bring it back, it's still probably only 2 inches deeper there. So again, I've got that lovely little slope to be able to fish on. And then I keep coming back, and there, that's where it's dropped off the slope. You'll be able to see there. From there, it's not too much. Here, that's where it's starting to go down. And the next bit of what I wanted to show you was that slope that we're fishing on. So as I go to my left-hand side, I'm coming away from the island. So you'll be able to see it just gradually starts getting deeper and deeper as you come away from it. So what you might hear when people are fishing, you know, across in the winter time is, I caught a few and then I had to move. What they mean by that is your first spot. So this is where I'm going to fish. Again, looking at my fixed far bank marker, I've got a lovely little leaf that's stuck right next to the water there. So that's a lovely little spot there that I can fish in. I can't come to the right hand side of my peg. Again, great place for dobbing, no good for feeding. But sometimes you can go in, you can catch a few there, and then you might have to move where the fish spook away from you. So then it's a case of grabbing your next section and maybe putting another little bit of tape in that same depth. So then you can gradually, say, fish that same depth, you're a little bit further, but you're going more off at an angle. So that's what I'm looking for. But you'll be able to see it's lovely. I've got a really, really nice gradual slope in that 2.5 foot. So this is going to be my first spot, but I always have like a little plumb up just to see what it feels like regarding you know, how the bottom is. But I'm really happy there. I've got a lovely little spot. So there in, say, 2.5 foot, it's absolutely perfect. Now, if we were sat on that island, we'd be doing exactly the same over here. So summertime, again, they're going to be really close to you, but I want to make the most of this space. There's an odd fish moving around. Again, always keep your eyes open in the winter time. So, say if I was sat over there, I'd be looking for that same depth here. Now, I'm not going to be able to catch them in like 2.5 foot close to myself like we would do in the summer months, but I will be able to catch in that same depth fishing longer down the bank. And this is where separating my 3 lines so they're not too close to each other, I think, is really important. So I'm going to come back to me join on my section. Again, if your memory's not the best, anywhere where you decide to fish, as long as you've got a far bank marker and you've got your bit of tape, it's never going to move. But I know that on this join, down my left hand side, I can find a similar depth. So there, as I come in, it does start to jump up a little bit, but there I've got a little spot, and then see there it just starts dropping down, but it's gradual. It's just a gradual slope. So now when it comes to sort of picking my far bank marker, so about there, when I lay my pole, as I'm looking at it, I'm always trying to think of something what's not going to move. So as I'm looking, say, down my pole, the scaffold tube on the platform, I can just see a tiny little bit where I know that that is where I'm, say, that body over depth. And that is what it's a case of in terms of starting. You know, it can always change throughout the match. Sometimes it fishes better than you expect, sometimes it fishes more difficult than you expect. But that's the biggest thing that I'm looking for when it comes to deciding where to fish. But I think the biggest thing of touching on is just try and think about you as a fish. I know that's going to sound mad, but that's the best bit of advice I can give you, is looking at the lake. Every match is different. Sometimes there's a lot on it, sometimes there's not as many on it. In the summertime, space is 1,000,000% your friend, because you've got all of this water to be able to draw the fish from. Again, they want to eat, so they're going to come to you. In the winter time, it's the opposite. You know, having too much space is not a good thing, because they just tend to keep backing off. But that's really the biggest difference between summer and winter. Summer, they come to you. Winter, they're going to drift away. But always try and think, right, if I wanted to get away, depending on how it was pegged today, where would I go and sit? And then lastly, just keep your eye out for like an odd fish topping, an odd little pimp. Sometimes that can just give you that little bit of, I want to say it's sneaky, but it's not. That's that little bit of watercraft that you're looking and you just see an odd few pimps and you think there's an odd fish there, or you just see one top. It can just give you a little bit of an insight into where they're actually hiding on the day.